You and Likutei Sichos in Chelik Chavav. This is the first Sicha for the Parshas Boy. In this Sicha, the Rebbe discusses why is Kiddush HaChodesh, the mitzvah in the Parsha, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodoshim, why is it the first mitzvah? As Rashi said in the beginning of the Chumash, that the Torah should have started with this mitzvah because it's mitzvah Rishona. And the Rebbe is going to explain the powerful mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh, how it impacts the world, it changes things in the world, and the change. The Rebbe eventually comes up to the idea that the whole essence of time becomes under through the Kiddush HaChodesh becomes under the uh, Torah rule, and the Rebbe goes through a whole great deal until the Rebbe comes to the final point. Learning the Sicha Lila Nishmas Harav Levi Yitzchok ben Chaim Tzvi Lila Nishmosei. His first yahrzeit is coming up in Hey Shvat, and we're learning this to benefit his soul. Hey Nishmosei Tzrura B'Tzrura Chaim. Aleph. The mitzvah lekadesh chodoshim ulechashiv shonim v'chadoshim bebezdin bilvad. So there is a mitzvah, and the mitzvah. This is the language of the Rambam. Min ha-mitzvahs is to sanctify the months. Notice the lashon lekadesh chodoshim, as we'll talk about it later. But also v'lechashiv shonim v'chadoshim, and to calculate years and months. And this should be done based in bilvad, meaning only based in is authorized to do all these various calculations, and both to make the month Rosh Chodesh to be Mekadesh, Mekudesh. Based in would say when they decided which day is Rosh Chodesh, and then also they would calculate years because sometimes the different years had different months to and make sure that it falls out in the right time. And the Chodoshim, as the Rebbe will bring down soon a little bit more in details. But this is done in bed. That's the mitzvah. Where does this mitzvah come from? This mitzvah comes from the pasuk in our parsha. Learned man up from pasuk. HaChodesh hazeh lochem rosh chodoshim, rishon hu lochem l'chotshei hashana. This month, talking about the month of Nisan, when the Yidden were being freed of Mitzrayim. So this month is the first of all the months, which means Nisan is the first month. And this is the Rosh, the head. Rishon hu lochem l'chotshei hashana, it's the beginning of the month of the year. The first month is Nisan, and then goes the other month. So this is the pasuk, and from here we learn all the different aspects of being Mekadesh the Chodesh and to calculate the years and months. Zokt Rashi b'pirushei b'mokem achar lifnei. So Rashi says comments elsewhere, mentioning not on this pasuk over here, but this is actually in the very first Rashi. Rashi refers to this mitzvah that we're learning in this parsha, which quoted the Rambam, is the Kiddush HaChodesh and the Shonim, and to calculate, Rashi calls this the first mitzvah. Zokt Rashi b'perusha b'mokem achar elsewhere lifnei zeh. Earlier, this is right in the beginning of the Chumash in Bereshis Aleph Aleph. Benegay to their mitzvah as it relates to this mitzvah, as lo hoyo tzorich lahaschilas hatoyra ela ma'achodesh hazeh lochem. Rashi refers there, Pasuk says, Bereshis bara lekim, that the Eibishter created es hashemayim v'sa'oretz. So Rashi comments from Rabbi Yitzchak over there in the Pasuk that the Torah should not have started with the story of creation, elo ma'achodesh hazeh lochem, but m'chodesh lochem. And Rashi refers to it, shehi mitzvah rishona shenitztavu bo Yisrael. This is the very first mitzvah that the Yidden have been commanded. So why did the Torah not start with the Torah is a book of mitzvahs? So why did the Torah not start with the commandments, with the Kiddush HaChodesh, which is the very first mitzvah, shenitztavu bo Yisrael? Rashi explains that his masbir matam posach b'Bereshis. Why did he open up with Bereshis? And Rashi says of the Koyach Mais of Higid La'amei Losam Nachas Goyim. This was the Eibishter telling his power that he created everything, and therefore if the Goyim come and say that Eretz Yisrael belongs to them, and he interrupted from them, and the answer is the Eibishter is the one that created. God created everything, and He gave it to them, and then He gave it to the Yidden. He can choose to give who He wants it to, and therefore that was the reason why the Torah started with Bereshis Bara Likim to tell us that Hashem created the world. But Rashi says that the very first mitzvah is the mitzvah from Kiddush HaChodesh. And there is Masbir Matam Basar Bereshis. Rashi gives the explanation why he started with Bereshis, but Rashi calls it that it should have started with HaChodesh HaZalochem. And the Rebbe in the Sikha is going to explain why is it Takeh the mitzvah Rishonah. Let it be the mitzvah Rishonah. Why is it the mitzvah Rishonah? Everything is with a reason. And why was that chosen the mitzvah Rishonah? And the whole Sikha is going to evolve around explaining the unique mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh. But before the Rebbe explains that, the Rebbe has to clarify that even though Rashi calls it a mitzvah Rishonah, but when you look like in the Rambam calls other mitzvahs mitzvah Rishonah. Rambam calls to believe in God the first mitzvah. Anoich Hashem Elikecha. You can't have a mitzvah if you don't have Anoich Hashem Elikecha. If you don't believe that there is God, you don't have all the other mitzvahs. So the Rambam calls believing in Hashem, that there is Hashem, the first mitzvah. But the Rebbe explains that Rambam is talking about the person. The person is obligated in acknowledging and first knowing Hashem. But the first mitzvah written, recorded in the Torah is the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh. And there must be a reason why that's the first mitzvah recorded. So in the context that Rambam is talking about the mitzvah, which is on the person, first thing that a person needs to know is that there is God. But in the Chumash, what Rashi is talking about is the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh. And what's the reason for that? So the Rebbe explains now. Aber die Moine ha-mitzvahs, or Rambam okiyotzubai, those who count mitzvahs, such as the Rambam and others, rechenin dik the minyan ha-mitzvahs kisidron, when they start counting the number of mitzvahs in the order, is the mitzvah from Kiddush HaChedesh, but they need the mitzvah Rishonah. So by them, the mitzvah of sanctifying the month of the Chodesh, that's not the first mitzvah by them. Ubedavke bazeh. And it's not just that they davke count another mitzvah, they don't just happen to mention another mitzvah, but they specifically say the mitzvah Rishonah is something else, not this. Uledugma, for example, the Rambam says mitzvah Rishonah, and it says specifically to tell us that this is number one. The very first thing that needs to be mitzvah Rishonah, mitzvah saseh, the first mitzvah of the positive mitzvah is leida, is to know sheyesh malakah, that there is a God over there. Shenemar with the pasuk, for this is anoich Hashem Elokecha. So I'm God, your God. So the Rambam quotes that this is the very first mitzvah. And the reason for why that is the first mitzvah is also understood. Under Tam derfun is, and the reason for this is because farstandig bepashtus, that's self-understood. It's simply understood. While the idea from vikiyim from kol mitzvahs, the knowledge, knowing the rest of all and observance of all the mitzvahs is shayich nor noch them. It only applies after this is the idea. Once you have the knowledge yesham elokah, that there is a God. So if you have the knowledge that there is a God, then you can do mitzvahs. So the first mitzvah is to accept and know that there is Hashem. And the Rambam used it in the very beginning of his book of Yad HaChazokah. He starts off, Ados is Yisoida Yisoidos V'Amuda Chochma, the pillar of all pillars and the pillar of all wisdoms is what is Leida Sheyesh Motzurishon, to know that there is Hashem. That's the foundation before anything. And that's the pillar of wisdom, is to know the Amud HaChochmas, that there is Hashem. So we see that the Rambam specifically called that the first mitzvah. So it doesn't mean in idea. So we see, according to the Rambam, so the very first mitzvah a person needs to do is believe in Hashem. Rashi says mitzvah rishono is achidush al zelochem. And Rashi is really talking about the mitzvah rishono that was recorded, not about what's the most first comes first. V'pirush Rashi meinter bepashtus rishono zu werden geschrieben b'Torah. In Rashi, what he means, simply talking that it's the first to be written in the Torah, that was recorded first, the mitzvah chodesh hazalachem. So, therefore, now we're saying that it's not in importance. The importance is to believe in Hashem. That's the first. This is recorded. So one can argue, okay, so this was recorded first, second. What difference does it make? That first is not really so significant because we're only talking specifically how it was recorded. But the Rebbe says no. The fact that it was recorded first means that that's significant as the first. Vibald, ober as al inyonim shebetoira. Zainen bediuk, since all aspects of Torah are precise. Yesh loymar, we can say, as choch b'shayches zum odom, that although as it's related to the person, Gavra, the person, to the person, what's the most important first mitzvah is to believe in God. But as far as the most important first mitzvah, as far as being written down, is Kiddush HaChodesh. Is mitzvah rishona. The first mitzvah is Leida Sheyesho Melaka, to know that there's a God, Ubeloshin Razal, and to use the language of our sages of blessed memory. They say, As frier dav zayin yikabel olav oil malchus shamayim. Over there we say, how come Shema Yisrael v'haftus Hashem Elikecha comes before V'hoyim Shemoya, the second parsha of Shema? So it's explained that first prayer, Darv Zayin Yikabel Olav El Malchus Shemayim. First we have to accept upon himself the yoke of the heavenly kingdom. In other words, say Shema Yisrael, believe in Hashem. When there's the noch, and then later on, V'hoyim Shemoya Tishmei Yikabel Olav El Mitzvah, should accept the mitzvah. So as far as the person is concerned, Taka, the first thing is you have to believe in Hashem, and then you do the mitzvahs. But that's from the perspective of the person. But Torah, which is the entity, the chefza, the object of Torah, first comes the mitzvah Kiddush HaChodesh. Aber vider inyan is mitzad Torah. But the way, the idea, what is first in Torah, mitzad chefza, the object, is the mitzvah rishono, the first mitzvah, was mit ir hat lechere gedarft sein lahaskell satorah, which seemingly, as Rashi asks in the beginning, the Torah should have started, is what? The chefza is a chodesh hazalochem. Chodesh hazalochem is the mitzvah rishono, while the mitzvah hat in sich hatoichen ikri. This mitzvah has something, a main idea in the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, the Yisoid, the fundamental mitzvah, from Klolus HaTorah mitzvahs, from the general Torah mitzvahs, fundamentally and mainly the content of the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh is something which is very important and very fundamental of all the Torah. That's why it's the first mitzvah. And the Yesh Loimar, and the Rebbe says, so we can say Ados is become in Yonim, that this is in various areas. The Rebbe is going to mention now 3 areas in which the Rebbe later on is going to explain in the beginning all these 3 areas. And then the Rebbe is going to say, no, this is not sufficient. And the Rebbe brings down even a deeper and a more inner insight why this is. But first, the Rebbe says that this is becoming yon. This is in many things, which is all yes. But the Rebbe is going to say that's even more. What is it? Aleph. The mitzvah weist them oifum von the sinas HaTorah. This mitzvah shows how the Torah was given. As the Rebbe will say shortly, that the Torah was given, the Torah shebiksav and Torah shebal peh. The Rebbe brings down from the Eben Ezra that we see that this mitzvah is very brief. And it means that the Torah gave the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh to tell us that Torah Shabbat has the parallel, the partner Torah Shabbat Peh, which explains Torah Shabbat. That's the main part of Torah, to know that there is the Torah Shabbat Peh that explains the Torah Shabbat. So that's the way the Torah was given. And number two, base, it brings out the power of Torah mitzvahs, the power that when Beis Din is Mekadesh the Chodesh, that can change even nature. As the bring down the Rebbe the example later on, if halachically by the age of 3, then the din is that under 3 years old, the Besulasel Chayzrim, but if Beis Din was Ma'aber the Chodesh, then she would still be Katan. We'll see in a minute. We're going to the details, but we see Torah is in charge over world. Whatever Torah decides, the Chachamim decide, HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem, that will change the nature of the world. We'll see in a minute. And number 3, Gimel, in Ir Zok Tzicharois de Matorah V'Tachlis for Mitzvah Torah. In it, in the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, it expresses itself, the goal and the purpose of the mitzvahs of the Torah, Kittel Kamon, that mitzvahs are meant to change the world and to bring about a godliness, the Eberster's presence into the world, as the Rebbe will elaborate in the next parts of the Sikha. Now, these 3 areas. So first, the Rebbe base. So the Rebbe basically said over here that in Torah, Rashi says it's the mitzvah Rishonis Kiddush HaChodesh, and the Rebbe wants to know why is that. The Rebbe explains, even though as far as the person goes, the first mitzvah is to believe in Hashem, but as far as recorded, it's Kiddush HaChodesh. Why is Kiddush HaChodesh the first mitzvah? And the Rebbe says in 3 areas. It shows us how Torah was given. It brings the power that Torah mitzvahs has. It also brings us the goal of Torah mitzvahs, as the Rebbe will explain. So first, the Rebbe brings down the Eben Ezer over here in Beis. How come the Torah is so brief in explaining what Chodesh is Alochem Rosh Chodashim? We don't have many details. He asks, compare that, for example, to Tzaras, which is really not applicable now, and it's only by one individual. The Torah writes Tazriah, Mitzvah. We have so much details in the parshas. How come Kiddush HaChodesh, which is continuous, it's always there, is mentioned so briefly in the Torah, which the Even Ezra says that this is why, because this tells us very clearly that we must have the oral Torah to go along together with the written Torah. Base that Even Ezra b'Parshas Seinu tells them, the other Even on Parsha replaces himself was Moshe lePirish Lanu b'Torah. He did not articulate in the Torah how do we set up the years and the months. And if we don't find spring, what are we going to do? In other words, we need the Pesach should be in the Chodesh Aviv, should be in the spring. And if we don't set it up, so what happens? How do we get the Chodesh Aviv? And the answer to that is we have to make an extra month as we make the cheshbon. But the question is, so from this there is a great surprise. How come? How is it that he does go through explaining all the laws of the leprosy, of the leopard, all the different boil, the different signs, the different plagues. It's only, we're talking about one person. And that also doesn't stand forever, because we know that the Mitzvah doesn't apply. It only applies at the time. So that the Torah goes into great detail, tells us all the details. And then the Torah lets alone the matter of the times that we're supposed to know. Shekol Yisrael Chayavim L'Shamra. All Yidden are obligated to keep it, the times. The times is a very essential and a very important thing. B'chol zman. That's for all times. We have to keep the holidays. V'yesh koris al achilas chometz b'Pesach. If one should eat chometz b'Pesach, then there is kares to get cut off. It's a very serious punishment. Now, how do we know when Pesach is? That depends on the Chodesh Hazeh, Kiddush HaChodesh. So it means that that's a very important mitzvah, which even carries kares if one eats chametz on Pesach. Valachilas Yom Kippurim, eating Yom Kippur. So how come over here we don't have any details in the mitzvah Chodesh Lochem? And the Rebbe Nezer is masbir. The Rebbe Nezer explains. Avizelois, this is actually a proof Kisamach al kriyas bezdin b'chol der v'der, that the pasuk relies on what Bezdin will do in every generation. And even though the Torah does not articulate it, is that means that the Torah relies on the Bezdin that they will uh, do it according to the halacha as it is in the oral Torah, as the Rebbe explains. Just haste. As von der Mitzvahs Kiddush HaChodesh is da an Ois. That from the Mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh there is a sign, there is a proof. Aichocha Bruder Galia. Ois means it's a very clear and very open evidence. As Torah Bepirushanitna, that Torah was given together with its commentary with the Torah Shabbat Peh, explaining what it is. As Torah Shabbat Peh was the Chachamim b'chol adeiros of Megalagven, the oral Torah which was revealed by the sages of all generations, and they inside all the insight and the revelation of Torah Shabbat Peh is ein zach mit Torah Shabbat. It's really one with the written Torah, and that's why this is all an ois together. And that's why it's a proof. That's why Kiddush HaChodesh is not written, but we know it because the sages, the Torah Shabbat Peh, articulates it, and it comes together with the Torah. Befrat, especially that the idea of times setting up is something a crucial part in Yiddishkeit, as the kiyum from Gor Asach Mitzvahs HaTorah, the observant fulfillment from very many mitzvahs of the Torah, v'chazainen verbunden mit Zmane Hashana, which are tied to the times of the year, is verbunden davke mit the Kvisa Chadoshim, and that's tied specifically as the months were set up for Chulu, and the months and the years, and wie die Chachamim haben gewegt mit Torah Shabbat Peh, as the Chachamim set up in the oral Torah. That's the way we do all the holidays, all the Yom Tovim. It's all based on the Rabbanon. There's no Torah command or anything about this. Clearly, only based on what the Rabbanon said. That shows to us, and the Rebbe explains the Even Ezra, that this is something unique about Kiddush HaChodesh, that we have to say that this is connected, that the laws of the Torah come together with the laws of the Torah Shabbat Peh, as explained by the Torah Shabbat Peh. Another area, that was the number one that I said before, the power, the way the Torah was given. The other thing is the power, the strength of Torah. The strength of Torah is that the Torah can actually change Metzias. In other words, if Beis Din decides to be Mechadish the month, that month can change the facts on the ground, not the nature of the ground. The Rebbe brings down like this. Al derech zeh bringt the mitzvah from Kiddush HaChodesh. Also, this mitzvah, similar to this, it expresses as Torah is a balabayis in Welt, that Torah is in charge over the world. Wie der Maimer Razal HaYidua, this is a saying of our sages, which is known on the verse. The pasuk says, Lokeil Goimer Olai. The Eberster, he is the one that decides for me, which means it's the decision lays on by God, by the Torah. So the din is Bas Sholish Shon V'yem Echad. So if there is a young girl who's 3 years old and one day, so at that time uh, the Besuliseho, once he's 3 in 1 year, then she doesn't get it back. But what happens when Imlochim Bezdin Lo'ivre? So Bezdin decided to make it a longer month. It's a full month, so that Rosh Chodesh will be on the next day, the 31st day. So then Hapsulim Chayzrim, the Besulim go back. Uh, so before she was the Teva, the nature was that she was Sholosh Shanim V'yem Echad, and then the Besulim should not come back. But if Bezdin decide to Ivra means that she's not really fully 3 years old, Hapsulim Chayzrim, they do return. They don't return. So we see that nature, the nature of this particular girl depends on the Bezdin if they were Mekadesh, the Chodesh or not. It tells us the power of Torah, that Torah controls the world. Under Far. So the Rebbe says for this two reasons that we said before, uh, is mitzvahs Kiddush HaChodesh, the mitzvah Rishonis and Istabu Bo Yisrael. This is the first mitzvah that the Yidden were commanded because of the special powers and the special way of Torah. Biz as and to the extent that this is the first mitzvah, and Rashi argues, and from the Medrash that lo tzorich lahaskell shouldn't have started, but with this mitzvah elachulu kinal. That's how we know this is important. Why is it so important? Weil von ihr nennt man dem Yesoid in Esinas HaTorah, because from this mitzvah we are able to take the basis of what the Torah was given. And the Amunah in the emes from Torah Shabbal Peh. First of all, we know from the mitzvahs Kiddush HaChodesh, the belief in the truth of Torah Shabbal Peh. This mitzvah clearly tells us that there is Torah Shabbal Peh, that because otherwise it doesn't really fit all the halachas that we don't know, not only Torah Shabbal Peh. So we get that. Number two, the Rebbe is talking about the two things. In the Toikev HaTorah mitzvahs b'chlal. This tells us the force of Torah and mitzvahs in general. Dem koyach zu meshana zayin the temple mitzias olam. The power to change the nature and the facts of the world. The world entities and facts of the world are changed by what Torah says. So those are the two areas. And the Rebbe will say these two areas are not enough. We need the third area also we learn, as the Rebbe will explain in a minute. But before the Rebbe does that, the Rebbe says this is also, because we're talking about that this gives us the Toike from Torah, this also explains how Breishis Bara is connected to this mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, because after all, yes, it was supposed to start with Kiddush HaChodesh. It starts with Breishis Bara, but Breishis Bara is actually, in a way, the same idea. Breishis B'Shvil Torah, B'Shvil Yisrael. So we know that Torah and Yidden are the creation, purpose of creation of world, and therefore the Torah, when the Yid behaves according to the Torah, it can change the world. So based on this, we'll understand sweeten another area, another idea. Although what it says clearly, we're not saying, well, oh, this is something which Bereshis Bara Likim tells us that the Torah is Balabos in charge of the world, like we're learning from Parashat Chodesh now, doesn't say that. What does it say very clearly? As the Tam was possible, Bereshis is Valkoyach Ma'asevikid La'amechulu. But the pasuk, the Rashi explains there from Amar Rabbi Yitzchok, that the reason why he did start with Bereshis, not because Bereshis has a connection to Parshas HaChodesh, but that is to tell the power of his action to his people, so that was important for the Torah to write it first. Rashi as Rashi concludes there. But at the end of the day, Bereshis does take the place of a Chodesh. It makes sense that there should be some connection. Ibald, or as the Haskola from Bereshis Bora. Since the beginning, that it starts the Torah with Bereshis Bora, is been coming from their Haskola, takes the place of the opening. What's the sort of Gedarv, which should have been. The Torah should have not started. So that means that really what belongs in the beginning is Achodesh Hazalochem. And now we replaced it with Bereshis Bara, okay, for another reason. But the Rebbe says, is Mistaber Zogan, it's logical to say, as that also, according to the conclusion, there is a connection between Bereshis Bara and Achodesh Hazalochem. Based on what the Rebbe says now, that the specialty of a mitzvah of Achodesh Hazalochem is that tell us that Yidden are in charge over the world, mitzvahs and Torah charge in the world. Oh, now this is beautiful. So that's why it's connected to Bereshis Bora. Now this does move it. Bereshis Bora Likim is Rashi Mefarish. Bereshis Bora Likim, Rashi explains what does it mean Bereshis Bora Likim. B'shvil ha-Torah shenikras Reshis Darkoi. Bereshis means Beis Reshis. Two things that are called Reshis. First, the Torah, which is called Reshis. Why did Hashem create the world? Is Beis Reshis because of one Reshis, Torah, which is called Reshis Darkoi, the beginning of the path. That's one. Ubishvil Yisrael shenikroim Reshis Tvosei. And also because of Yidden, they're called the beginning of Hashem's reign. They're called also Reshis. So these Beis Reshis are the reason why Bereshis Bara Elokim, why He created the world. Und wie bald, als die ganze Brie ist Bishvil HaTorah, Bishvil Yisrael, since the entire creation is for the Torah and for Yidden, is verstandig, so now it's understood. As when Bezdin paskent al pi Torah, as der Chodesh is meuber, when Bezdin rules according to the Torah that this month is supposed to be a leap year, that means that the age is not yet 3 years old. She's missing one day to 3 years old. Poildos azoi in Metzias Olam. That impacts the facts on the ground in the world. Warum the ganze Brie ist beschaffen geworden zu lieb Torah wie Yisrael, because the entire creation is because of Yidden and Yisrael. So you see that it's similar. Rebbe explained that the second reason, one reason it tells us how Torah was transmitted, but the second reason was because it gives us the strength of Torah, that Torah can change the facts of the nature of the world. And that is associated closely to the Bereshis Bara Likim, which ended up starting off Torah because of but in the end, it's taking the place of Chodesh Hazeh, because Bereshis Bara also says basically the same concept, that it's Torah and the Yid that the created the world, and that's why we understand why a Yid through Torah can change the world. But remember, we still have that third aspect. The Rebbe is saying that these two area are not enough to tell us why HaChodesh Hazalochem should be the first mitzvah, because these are all not the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh itself. It's telling you Kiddush HaChodesh, what it accomplishes, that it tells you that it can change the world because of the Kiddush HaChodesh, but there needs to be something in Kiddush HaChodesh itself, as Rebbe would say, is explaining now, that there's something in the mitzvah itself. Dalet. Das is aber nit maspik. That's why we need the third. The Rebbe brought down three things before. The first two things are good, but there's also a third thing that we need to. Das is aber nit maspik. This isn't sufficient. Warum der Inyan as b'shas bezdin is ma'aber dem chodesh? Because this kind of idea that we were discussing now, when bezdin makes the leap year, b'suleho chayzerim, so the b'sulem of this girl will return, meaning naturally she will become a child under 3 at that point, because bezdin changed what the month is not in their mitzvah atzma. That's not a change. It's not the mitzvah itself. I'm feeling it in the Levona. There's not a change in the Levona. But at Tetzah, this result was very nazaitik ezach legamri. This is something because of the Kiddush Levana, something in the side which has nothing to do with the actual Levana, that it makes a change. But from the Loshen mitzvah rishona, it says mitzvah rishona, shenitztava Yisrael is mashma. That's the first mitzvah. As the inyan from rishona, the fact that it's first is verbunden mit der mitzvah. That's the mitzvah is the first. That's mitzvah kiddush hachodesh. So umizeh as the teuchen umatoras hamitzvah kommt in them b'hadgosha. So from this we see that the contents and the goal of this mitzvah is emphasized in the fact that that's Rishoina, that the mitzvah itself, not because it's going to change because of that something else. As the Rebbe will explain, that's the third inyan that the Rebbe said before. The four is that mitzvahs are to make a change in the world. The mitzvah of Kiddush Chodesh shows us that we take time and we turn it into a kedusha. We make this into that's an impact on the world, which is the purpose of all Torah mitzvahs. The concept itself that the month makes it different by the kiddush hachodesh. Let's look inside. Hey, we can say the explanation in this. Iker in yonam for mitzvahs haTorah. The main aspect of the mitzvah of the Torah is to oiftan kedusha in Welt, is to accomplish sanctity in the world. Und das ist die Nekude von allen Mitzvahs HaTorah. This is the point, all mitzvahs of the Torah. Man nimmt a Hefzer von Olam, you take an object of the world, und man macht davon a Hefzer shel Mitzvah, and you make it into an object of a mitzvah. Bis as das wird an Inyan von Kedusha, to the extent that that becomes holy. So you take a worldly matter, something, and you turn it into a mitzvah. Und das ist euch der Teuchen von Kiddush HaChodesh. This is also the content. That's what does Chodesh do? The Raiftu was based in his Mekadesh Achevtzer, the novelty that based in makes an object, a Yom Mesuyim, he takes a day als Rosh Chodesh, that he makes it Rosh Chodesh, nit Yom HaMais. It shouldn't be a regular day, a work day, day of a korban miyuchat v'chulu, make it a special korban. Bis as v'hoya midei Chodesh b'chodshei, every month by month is the same. So we see in that posik, they equate both of them every Shabbos by Shabbos. This is a natural phenomenon. The Shabbos is the seventh day of the week, and we have a chodesh and we have a special korban. We have a special holiday, a day of rest. So we're saying that every month also. So we're equating the month to month, just like from Shabbos to Shabbos. How do we take a regular weekday and make it into a chodesh? That's the based in koyach to change an aspect, a mitzias, an entity of the world, and make it into a cheftz of kedusha. Ubelshoina Rambam, and the like using lotion of the Rambam. Sheyikachu based in v'yikvu oisa yom rosh chodesh. That Beis Din sanctifies, and they set that up to be Rosh Chodesh. That is Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh is a new month. They who did it, Beis Din did it. She'ein hariya kivas elo Beis Din she'omru mekudesh hem shekodim. It doesn't matter that they saw it and they know that it's Rosh Chodesh because the moon was so. That doesn't set Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh is said by the Beis Din she'amru mekudesh heim shekodim. That's what sets up the month. You see, Beis Din saying mekudesh takes a weekday and makes it into a Rosh Chodesh in a special korban, in a special not a special day. And that's not only Rosh Chodesh. The same thing is with all the holidays. Und das ist auch verbunden mit Kedushas HaMoyados. This is also tied to the sanctity of all the holidays, not just Rosh Chodesh. While Yisoid mitzvahs Kiddush HaChodesh, the basis of the mitzvah Kiddush HaChodesh, Kidesh Yasu Yisrael Moyadei Hashana b'Moyadom, that the Yidden should do the Moyadim of the year, the notion of the Chinuch, that they should do it on the right way. How do we know when to make Pesach? We need to know when Nisan, Rosh Chodesh Nisan is, the 15th of the month. How do we know when to make Sukkot? How do we know when Yom Kippur is? So everything, Rosh Hashanah, everything depends on the festivals of the year. Depends on the Kiddush HaChodesh. Based on determines when is the day of the month, and that's what becomes the foundation. The Chinuch says to set up all the months based on the Kiddush HaChodesh. Und der Rebbe sagt man bei Yom Tov. In the Kiddush and Yom Tov we say Mekadesh Yisrael v'Hazmanim. Shabbos you say Mekadesh HaShabbos. Because the Eibishter makes Shabbos, but Zmanim, the Eibishter doesn't make Mekadesh by himself. Is Mekadesh Yisrael v'Hazmanim. While Yisrael tekachim l'Zmanim. Because it takes the Yidden to sanctify, make this time holy, a Yid. It doesn't happen by itself. It's not a natural phenomenon. It's something that which the Beis Din changes the facts of the ground. So this additional point to what we spoke before about how Torah was given and the impact of Torah, here we're talking about that this demonstrates the Chlal taking an object and changing it around, because this is what mitzvahs are all about, is to take weekday and make it into holiness. Yeshleimar, as the Fari does mitzvah rishona, that's what the mitzvah rishona. Noisef al zeh, in addition to the fact was the nekuda klolis fun alle mitzvahs haTorah. In addition, that the central point of all Torah mitzvahs is to poil zayin in a chefza. They're all mitzvahs are there to impact an object as is zover in a chefza shel mitzvah, that it should become an object of a mitzvah. Because anytime you do a mitzvah with this, you make that object a mitzvah. Und the Kuduzu is begolui by the mitzvah from Kiddush HaChodesh Kanal. And this point is openly by the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh. We take a weekday and we make it into a Yom Tov Kanal and make it to Rosh Chodesh. And all the Yom Tovim that follow. But it's even more than this is the central idea of mitzvahs. But in the inner matter of things, is das Rishono Oich Binyon Madrigos. It's also the first in its aspect and its level. The first level of making sanctity is actually in the month. Basically, when the Yid does a mitzvah and he changes around, that's already in space. But time comes before space. The mitzvah Rishon is to make the Zman. And after that, we can make the chefts of everything else. The Penimis Inyonim is das Rishon Oich Binyonim Madrigos also in its aspect, in its level. It's really the very first thing is to change around time. And the Rebbe says like this: we have time and space, but time comes before space. Chotch der Geder von Olam is beide Sachen. Although the world is defined by both time and space, sai zman und sai mokim, both time and space. Und zman is verbunden mit mokim, and time is also is associated with space. But still, is aber beseder agdima kommt zman far mokim. But when you want to know what's first, time comes before space. Anything that you create, if it's a creation, you creating meaning before it wasn't, now it is, it's in time. To create space, when you created space, created means that it was before there was no space, now there is space. Is ashinu b'hoive, it's a change presently, what you have legabe over than before. Before creation. Created space. Created means that it was before it wasn't, and now it is. So that means there is time before that. Kommt ois as koidem yeder his havus, that prior to every bringing into being, oich farder his havus from mokim, even before the bringing in of space, is showing to given the metzias von azach. There had to be already the existence of such an item was werde noch nicht stane. That is changed. What is the change? There is an item that was changed. That was time. Was dosis teuchen in azman. That's time. There's a change before and after. Das heißt, die erste Metzies von Eulam was von der Metzies fangen sich an, allen im Zeus. That means, what is the very first entity from which all creations begin? Isman is time. Und wie es ist euch verstandig bepasst es, lagabe Odom. It's also very simply understood with regards to a person. As früher kommt bei ihm der Ondemsman. First is the time that comes to the person. Der Yom Mesum, a specific day. Und la'acher is seine Shaykh, seine Peulas bei Yom u'bechefza Olam b'Yom Zeh. Then he can do his activities on this day and the objects of the world in that day. So when we're doing mitzvahs or whatever you're doing, you first need a day, you need the time, and then that's how it relates to the person. That's in just by existence is that way, and also the person. First he has the day, and then it's the item in the space that you do in that day. On the far is Kiddush HaChodesh mitzvah Rishona. That's why Kiddush HaChodesh is the very first mitzvah. While früher Pearl Bezdin the Kedusha in Zman. First Bezdin impacts the sanctity in time. HaChodesh Hazeh. Odosi das Cholos HaMetzias. That's the first Metzias. And afterwards, kommt Maise Odom, then the act of the person comes. Then is the object to change things around with his action, that he impacts in objects of the world. Then is the space, which are a aspect of space. So basically, the Rebbe said there's the third area in which Chodesh Hazeh that it changes time, which is what not only because that's the whole idea of mitzvahs, but actually that's the first part of changing things. You have to change first the time to make it Chodesh. And then you can start talking about space. And that's why in conceptually, the very Rishona is the point of Zman, and that's changed by the Beis Din, who are Mekadesh the Chodesh, and Dafka there is what changes. But the Rebbe is going to say now, so that's the first part of the Sikha, which the Rebbe explained the three aspects, and the Rebbe, however, explains that this is not yet sufficient. The Rebbe asked a few questions on this, and the Rebbe will come up and give a further insight that the Chodesh Hazeh, this mitzvah, doesn't only change the time, or Rosh Chodesh, Yom Tov, it actually impacts all of time, as the Rebbe will detail now from Sivav and on. Look, the Rebbe, das is aber l'chayre nit maspik. The previous explanation that the Kiddush HaChodesh changes the object of Zman isn't sufficient. The Rebbe asks three questions. Number one, we don't always have to be Mekadesh. Only if the month can be Mekudesh that the 30th day is Rosh Chodesh, then they will be Mekadesh. But if the 30th day is part of the previous month, Beis Din is not Mekadesh the Rosh Chodesh, so they're not really Mekadesh. Let's look at number one, Aleph. Kiddush Yom Rosh Chodesh was based in Emrim Mekudesh, that to be Mekadesh, the day of Rosh Chodesh, the Beis Din says Mekudesh, so they're sanctifying, they're changing the object of time to Kedusha, is afilu bizman shoy mekachim al pi hariyah. So even during the time, the Rebbe will talk later on what happens after, but even during the time that they were Mekadesh based on the sighting of the witnesses of the moon, nit alamo, it doesn't happen all the time that Beis Din needs to be Mekadesh. Vorum ein Mekachin elo chodesh shenira bizmanu. The only time Beis Din says Mekudesh HaChodesh are Mekachin is if it's a month that it's seen on the time that after 29 days you see it. So the 30th day you make Rosh Chodesh. When Rosh Chodesh is B'Yom Lamed, that Rosh Chodesh is on the 30th day. Un ein mekachin el alaria. We're not going to be mekadesh only when we see the moon. Then you're mekadesh. But if the Rosh Chodesh is on the 31st day, so then you're not going to do Kiddush HaChodesh at all. So here the whole mitzvah of Kiddush we're saying is to make the Chefza. Bezdin doesn't always make the Chefza of the Kedusha. We're saying that this is the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh. So that's number one. Number two, um, Bechlal, part of the mitzvah is not just saying Kiddush HaChodesh, talking about the other parts of the mitzvah in which the Rambam doesn't use the word Kiddush. So somehow we're making a Chefza not only by Kiddush. Why are we saying that the Kiddush HaChodesh is the Chefza changing around, but there's other parts in part of that mitzvah which have seemingly not to do with Kiddush. Base. In der mitzvah von HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem is Nichla L'das Rambam. So according to the Rambam, in this part of this mitzvah, besides being Mekadesh the Chodesh, it also includes Oich U'lechashiv Shonim V'chadoshim Bebezdin. That you have to calculate the years, the leap years, the other, and also the month in Bezdin to reconcile, to figure out that it should all fall into place. And over there, you're not Mekadesh. And if them Zokman them Loshen, Ibur Shonim, nit Kiddush Shonim. So you're not Mekadesh. So, and this is all, so if the mitzvah is all about Kiddush, but within the mitzvah itself, the other parts besides Rosh Chodesh is not Kiddush, that's Ibur Shonim. It's not Kiddush Shonim. And further, number 3, Gimel, the Rebbe says, B'chlal Bizman Hazeh, we don't have at all the witnesses, Mekadesh the Chodesh. We have calculation, we have a calendar. And over here, so it turns out, in nowadays, the whole mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh doesn't really apply. The whole idea we're saying that this mitzvah tells us to, that we change the Chefza. We're not even Mekadesh it at all. Gimel, Leuten Rambam, according to the Rambam, as halacha l'Moshe Messinai hu, now this is a halacha established for Moshe shebizman sheyesh Sanhedrin koivin al pi hariyah, that when there is Sanhedrin, then we set up by the citing of the witnesses. Ubizman she'ein shom Sanhedrin, but when there is no Sanhedrin, koivin al pi hacheshbon hazeh shonu mechashim boi hayom, we set up the month based on that calculation that we count today. Ve'ein niskokin l'riyah, we don't require any vision of the moon. Is lefizeh, according to this, so this is a halacha l'Moshe Messinai lechatchila established this way. Oich dikvius api hacheshbon, that also the setting up according to the cheshbon, nichlal in der mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, that's part of Kiddush HaChodesh, that bisman shein shem Sanhedrin, we go by the calculation. Und demult is man nit mekadesh, but there's no Kiddush of the canal, then you're not mekadesh it. The only time you'll be Mekadesh is when you sing. Today we're not doing it on the Riyah. So the Rebbe points out we cannot say it's the Kiddush HaChodesh is what's the Chefza, the main central part of this mitzvah, is because it changes the object of the day, it makes it Kodesh, because even in the time when they were Mekadesh al Pi Hariyah, not always did they need Kiddush, because if it was on the next day, on the 31st day, there was no based in Mim Kaddish. And number 2, the Rebbe asks, Bechlal, the other part of the mitzvah is Bechlal not Kiddush HaChodesh, that's to calculate the month and the Chadoshim, and this is still part of this whole mitzvah, and here we're saying it's all about making the day holy, but it's or this man holy, and part of the mitzvah doesn't do that. And finally, number three, the Rebbe asks that Bisman Hazeh, this is also part of the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, and we don't have at all based in being Mekadosh. So how are we saying that the Kiddush HaChodesh, the reason why it's the mitzvah Rishona, because it changes time, doesn't happen all that often. It doesn't happen now. It doesn't even happen about Piariya. And it also includes the other parts. We have to say uh, something else. The Rebbe actually will bring out that the way we impact the world, sometimes it's in a direct way, and sometimes things are not directly, you don't do the mitzvah with them themselves. They become a preparation for the mitzvah. The Rebbe is saying that in the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, it's actually in a direct way that we are actually Mekadesh all the times, not only the Chodesh. And the Rebbe is first going to start by explaining a difficult Rambam. That's the way the Rebbe starts it off, by explaining a different Rambam, a difficult Rambam. Uh, there's one part is which Kiddush HaChodesh, which the Rambam mentions when he talks about the number of mitzvahs. He says Lekadish, Chadoshim, but then when he talks in the Rambam itself, he just brings about calculating the year. Let's look inside. Zayin. Wird man das verstehen, behagdin, was der Rambam, wenn rechnet die Mitzvah in Minyan HaMitzvahs. The Rambam, when he counts the mitzvah of Achidish Hazeh, sagt dem Loshen Kinal, that I've quoted before, it says two things. Lekadish Chadoshim. So yeah, as far as the month, he says to sanctify them. And that was the idea, to sanctify the uh, mundane and make it holy. But then it also says "Ulachashiv shonim v'chadoshim," to calculate the years and the month. That's the introduction. But then in the Rambam itself, in the Halacha, aber in the Halacha's gufa zokter betchilas hilchos kiddush hachodesh. But within the laws itself, so what does he say in the beginning of the laws of kiddush hachodesh? Mitzvahs esse achas. There's one mitzvah, vihi, doesn't mention anything about Lekadish. He says there's one mitzvah, Lechashiv ulikvoya veleda velikvoya, to calculate and to know and to set. Be'eze yom tchilas kol chodesh mechotshei hashana. On which day is the first of the month of all the month of the year? It doesn't say to be mekadesh it. It just says to calculate and to know and to set up when is the first day of the month. Each of the month of the year, when is the first day? Unal derech ze bifnim ha'alachas. And also, so that's the way he says in the beginning of Kiddush HaChodesh in the Rambam. And within the halachas itself, bifnim ha'alachas, he says mitzvahs asay min ha'torah al bezdin. It's a positive mitzvah of the Torah on the bezdin. Sheyachshavu v'yedu. They shall calculate to see im yira ha'yereich lo yira, if the moon will be seen or not. Doesn't again in the Sefer HaMitzvahs, when he counts the mitzvahs, he says lekadish and lekalculate. Here he just brings down to calculate and whether the moon will be visible or not. Und sagt nicht that the Teuchen von der Mitzvah is lekadish hachodesh. He doesn't say that the idea of this mitzvah is we're trying to sanctify the month. He just says to calculate which is the first month. The Tambe Pashas therefore is what's the reason, the simple reason for this. Because also the fact that you set months and you make years into leap years, which is based on the calculation, is nichlal the Rambam. According to the Rambam, it's all included in their mitzvah from Kiddush HaChodesh. It's all part of Kiddush HaChodesh. Nit nor the kviz v'kiddush al-pi is Mashiach Sanhedrin Kinal. Not only is setting and being sanctifying by the citing the time of Sanhedrin. So the Rambam doesn't use the language Lekadesh because it's not all about Lekadesh. Take, we make Rosh Chodesh, that's Lekadesh. But we need to calculate, it's not only about the Lekadesh Rosh Chodesh, it's also about how to make the leap years based on the Cheshvan. It's all part of Kiddush HaChodesh. And you're not Mekadesh that. So the Rambam doesn't use the word Kiddush. The only time where Mekadesh is, as the Rebbe says, is when there's Bizman Ariya, Bizman She'esh Sanhedrin, in the as the Rebbe brought up before, that's when we have Kiddush, but that's not the ultimate. It's not only about Kiddush. So the Mela, that's why the Rambam doesn't mention Lekadesh. But even though the Rebbe says that is true, that the Rambam can't say it's all about being Mekadesh the Chodesh, because according to the Rambam, it includes more than being Mekadesh. Also the Ibur Shonim, which is not Lekadesh. But why doesn't the Rambam also mention Lekadesh? He can say both, but Dafar Hasbore, we still need explanation. Pavos Doctor blows them inyan in the mitzvah say. Why does he only say this idea of to calculate in the mitzvah say? Lachshe v'leida v'likvoye be'eze yom tchilas kol chodesh, to calculate and to know and to set up which day is the beginning of the month. Why does he not also say was nit koilel in der mitzvah them inyan from kiddush hachodesh? Yeah, it includes more than just the kiddush hachodesh. But why doesn't he also say kiddush hachodesh? Was miskaveyu mekadesh al piariya, that you are setting up and you mekadesh al piariya. So somehow in the mitzvahs, minyan mitzvahs, the Rambam says lekadesh chodoshim v'lechashiv shonim v'chadoshim. But in the halachas itself, he doesn't say about lekadesh chadoshim. He only says about the calculation. And the Rebbe wants to explain that the Rambam wants to tell us that the impact of Yidden is not only when they're mekadesh the chodesh. The impact of Yidden is when they're calculating the years and the leap years, everything, that is also part of this special mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh. That's how the Rebbe is going to answer when we were saying before, what's this unique thing of mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh? Yes, it's the impact in the world, but it's not only in the impact in the world where you're actually making it a Kiddush, you're making it a Kiddush HaChodesh, you're making it a Rosh Chodesh. It's impacting the world in every part of the world directly. Let's see inside. That's the explanation. The ganze Bria is doch b'shvil ha-Torah b'shvil Yisrael. The entire creation is for Torah and for Yid. What does it mean? All of creation, b'chol inyonei habriya. It would include everything, not only certain aspects, not only with what you do a mitzvah. Everything in the Bria is for a Yid and for Torah. Shamayim v'orez v'chol tzvayim. The heavens, the earth, and all the armies, everything what's in it. Unit Nordis Havus, it's not only the first time that they were created was for Yidden, Zeire Bechlal, and generally when they were created. No, das ist a ständige Sache, but this is a constant matter which the Eibishter is always creating because of Torah and because of Yid. And what is a Yid supposed to do? So a Yid is supposed to take all of this that is created and to utilize it in Kedusha. But there's a difference sometimes if you make a mitzvah out of it itself, or it just helps you do a mitzvah. Doing a mitzvah is more closely to making the purpose of it is B'shvil Torah, B'shvil Yisrael, for the mitzvah of it. But then there is the avodah von Aiden besteht in them. What is the service? What is the work of a Yid? That if it consists in the said, I bring him bepoil, Megala sein, that he has to bring it in actuality and to reveal B'shvil HaTorah, B'shvil Yisrael in the Bria, that in created things, that this is all. Why was this created? Because the Torah in Yid, that the Yid should make an impact through the Torah. When a Yid is Mekayim HaMitzvah. So there's sometimes a very direct uh, impact on the Olam, on the world, which is created for Torah and the Yid. When a Yid is Mekayim HaMitzvah, mit a Chayfetz Shebe'olam, that he uses an object of the world to do a mitzvah, Vert al Yidei Zeh oizgefirt dem b'shvil. So through that, you accomplish, it was created because of, now you're using it. That's why it was created, because you're using it. The matores haberiya von der bestimmter Sach, the purpose, why was that particular thing created? So that the Yid should use it. Aziz b'shvil HaTorah b'shvil Yisrael, that you should use it for the Torah and the Yid. B'meila verdos achefetz shel mitzvah. That makes it into an object of a mitzvah, because you did the Eibishter's will, the Yid did the Eibishter's will, and this object that turned into a mitzvah. Uledugma, say for example, when a Yid macht von eura behema klaf for a sefer Torah. So when you take the skin of an animal and you make parchment for a sefer Torah, tefillin and mezuzahs, for stam, for sefer Torah, mezuzah, you use it as parchment. Werd durch dem durchgeführt Matoras Brias Eira Behema. That's where you accomplish the goal why the skin of the behema was created in the first place, because you used it for a mitzvah. As Vert von dem Klav, Achevtze de Torah Begoli. It becomes an object of Torah and openly. And that's in a way which is a very direct, you did a mitzvah, you turned that object into a Achevtze de Torah, a Achevtze de Kedusha, by making a Sefer Torah Tefillin Mezuzahs. And then there is a second step to it. The second step is that it's not just that particular piece of leather that you made a tefillin. That is supposed to impact everything else. All leathers, all skins, even though you're just using one. And let's go to Zman. The Baldas Eich Zman is an Ivra, since Zman is also created. Is moving as a Zoyis Eich Ben Egei Metzius as Man. So the same thing is true as it is with the entity of time, as it is B'shvil HaTorah, B'shvil Yisrael, that is for Torah and Yid. Und das ist der Teuchen von Mitzvahs Kiddush HaChodesh. That's the exact mitzvah that we do. Durch dem, was Iden seinen Mekadish Chodoshim, Rosh Chodoshim Umoyadim, they are Mekadesh the month, and makes Rosh Chodesh, and then the holidays follows. Seine sie Megale, wie der Mittes Metzias von Zman is B'shvil HaTorah, B'shvil Yisrael. They revealed that the true entity of time is for Torah and Yid, and that's why the Yid changes the entity, makes it into Kedusha. Wie David HaMelech is mefarish, David HaMelech articulates it. He says, also Yereach, why did Hashem make the Yereach? Is das L'me'adim, for the Yom Tov. So when the Yidden are revealing that why was the moon created? For Yom Tov, so that's the Kiddush HaChodesh. But now, by objects, it's not just that one object. The same thing is with time. Just as it is, as it pertains to all matters of creation, as the kavon is nit blois in at chayfetz mesuyim. The intention is not just this object. As in imzol zog durchfir matoras briosi, that particular hide from that particular animal, in it you accomplish that the purpose of its creation was for the Yid to make a sefer Torah and film from it. Now the kavona is, but really the intent is, a dozel oifton of their moises, this should either accomplish or at least add in the ganze bria. So that accomplishes the whole bria. Ubechol proteo. All creation, all deeds of creation are uh, are changed around when we do a mitzvah, not only that particular, the entire creation and all details of and all details of creation. How does it impact other parts? You're just using one piece of skin over here. How does it have a connection? You're making a piece of skin for one animal for Sefer Torah. How does this help generally the world? How does it help in general? How does this impact everything else? That's true. Was wird al yidei zeh, was jeder Zach in der Brie helft daris. Because everything in creation supports this, helps the Yid. Yes, he's doing one thing, but how is he able to do that? By other things in creation are supporting it. Uniz Maisif Aiden Bavedose. It adds to the Yid in his service. There's other things, if there is, in this case, if there's this particular animal, this particular skin, there needs to be a whole herd. He needs to farm. So there's like directly he's using one, but everything around it is really a support to this one thing. And that's how everything else gets elevated. Und das stellt sich in Kamadargas. There's different levels how the support for this particular mitzvah would be. There is something which is called machshiri mitzvah. It helps the mitzvah. So in order for you to do the mitzvah, there needs to be an animal, there needs to be the feed. I mean, I'm just giving that as an example. There needs to be all the things and all the things that are around it. Then you have machshir machshirs, preparing the preparer, which means till you can get to the skin of the animal, you have to go through. The animal has to grow and has to be taken care of, and till you get it. And all the other parts that took place before are considered to be helping and being preparing. So when you take the animal actually and make the skin of it, that's the actual mitzvah. The other things are preparation. And the Rebbe says, Al derech zeh noch mer, similar to this and even more, is benegel zman, is as it pertains to time. As the hashlomas matoras habriya for the Chodesh Hashana, that how do we complete the goal of creation of the month of the year, is nit blois bozeh vos miskeveyo mekadesh dem rosh chodesh or the moed hashana. It's not only that you are setting up and you're sanctifying this rosh chodesh or these holidays of the year, one specific area that you are changing that object from zman and making it rosh chodesh or making it into a festival. Those haste, which would mean yomim mesuyomim, specific days, b'chodesh. But the real goal is nor wenn es wird der Herd in dem ganzen Hemshech Hazman, when it's sensed in the entire duration of time, that level of Hefzer that you changed it around. Even after Rosh Chodesh, der Bishvil HaTorah Bishvil Yisrael, that you sense in all of time, Bishvil HaTorah Bishvil Yisrael. So Rosh Chodesh is part of time, but how do you sense in the rest of it? Und das ist durch dem, was Bezdin is mekayim the mitzvah saseh, and that is when Bezdin fulfills the mitzvah saseh, lachashe v'leida v'likvoya be'eze yoim tchilas kochodesh b'chodesh hashana. Bezdin has to calculate all this. This is part. How can you fulfill the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh, of changing the entity? You need a whole system to calculate when is the beginning of every month, the months of the year. Was zu lieb them, darf doch Bezdin ausrechnen. Because of this, Bezdin needs to calculate, wissen the Protach Hashbenes Halach Halavonachol. It needs to know the detailed calculation how the moon travels. Und Yodim know the place of the stars and how they travel. Das heißt. So what does that mean? That means that we're involving more than just the Rosh Chodesh, say, make Chodesh. No. Rosh Chodesh is a part of the whole system of time. Das heißt, Neusef of der Peula in dem Zman von Chodesh Hashana. in addition to the act in the time of the month of year Duruch der Kviyas Vikidush Rosh Chodesh, that that's the simple thing, that you have the act in the time of the month of the year when you set up and you Kiddush Rosh Chodesh, Oich Tzolib de Moedes, also for the month, so you make it Rosh Chodesh. So now you're directly taking a weekday and turned it in and made it into a Yom Tov, into a Rosh Chodesh, or into a Yom Tov. Was in dem Eufen is there's manche betayim. In that way, the in-between time, blois v'amein hechsher zu kedushas as man von dem Bayadis. Then it's only similar to a preparation to the time of the sanctity of the time of the holidays. So the rest of the time, which is in between the holidays, are like the other objects, like we said before, which help the part of the mitzvah. But there's no mitzvah directly in them. So the mitzvah, the kiddush, the transformation is only on Rosh Chodesh. But the rest of the time, because you have Rosh Chodesh, you have other days, and it's all part of the system. But it's not a direct change around of the rest of the month. Because in order for it to be Rosh Chodesh, the Moed Hashana, darf man haben wissen im ganzen Hemshech Hazman von dem Chodesh. So you need to know, you need to know the entire duration of time of the month. But it's only in order to calculate the Chodesh. Chodesh is the main. The rest is a Hechsher. So here, what we're trying to tell you is more than that. It's not only as preparing and being part of the general system of Chodesh, and therefore the other things, the rest of the time is sort of a preparation. We're saying that there is actually directly in the calculation itself is noch mehr. Der etzem cheshbon was bezdin yachshavu v'yedu im yirayreach. The bezdin will calculate and they will know if the moon will be seen. Was das ist doch benegeya dem ganzen Hemshech vom Halach Halavon from dem ganzen Chodesh. That touches on, that is as it relates to the entire duration of the travel of the moon, of the whole month. The actual calculation over there is also part of the mitzvah. Is a tale from the mitzvah saseh gufa. That's part of this mitzvah saseh. So in other words, you're not only being Mekadesh, Rosh Chodesh, and the rest of it is like in between the Hechsher, but you're actually part of it is to be Mekadesh the time itself. The mitzvah says is nicht nor der Mekadesh and them talk from Rosh Chodesh. The mitzvah says is not just to sanctify the day of Rosh Chodesh, nor the Yachshavu v'yedu. That's part of the mitzvah says to calculate and to know. As in dem ganzen Hemshech Hazman Gufa, that within the entire duration of time itself, state begolui that b'shvil haTorah u'b'shvil Yisrael, in the entire Hemshech, not